Well, hello garden friends. We are getting into the time of year, I don't know how either already, but where we're starting to think about winding down the garden, right? And behind me what you see is a huge, look how big, this is so big, a huge elephant ear. I actually got it from a friend. I don't know what variety it is. But I am going to be dismantling this elephant ear so I can take it indoors for winter storage. They don't live in the climate here in Iowa over the winter. But I'm also going to be doing some planting because you know what? Fall is still a great time to plant. And I always want to promote that when you can find good plants, a lot of them can be planted all throughout the year, especially in the fall. So we're gonna do some great new planting on the front of my house. We're gonna get rid of this elephant ear and get it ready for winter storage. It's gonna be a great day and enjoying some good weather. We are right along the front of my house, the front porch. It faces the south. This has been a mix of things that I've learned what does well here, but I still have something in the back that to me has never been quite right. So in front, and we're going into fall, so they're starting to get on kind of their little dormancy, everything's looking to close in. But you can see I have lots of stockies, also known as lamb's ear, all along the front, and this is the Helen von Steiner big ears variety. I use that more as a ground cover, and usually all throughout the growing season it looks great. It's starting to look a little bit ready for the winter period. But behind it, I have some boxwood. They're wintergreen variety, an older variety that has a small leaf that I am slowly getting all to the same size here. It's behind those boxwoods that I've had more of this issue where I can't get quite the right thing. In years past, I had tried various hydrangea, and they didn't always love being there. I think the south side posed an interesting thing with the cement that's with my front porch. I think it would sometimes heat up too much and burn them. We're gonna talk about ways I'm gonna counteract that this time because I am gonna plant hydrangea again. We'll talk about what is gonna be going there, but let me show you the area first. So you can see here, the south side of my front porch, there's pumpkins on it. We're feeling the season. The boxwood are looking really good. So on a lot of them, there's two original ones from when my grandparents lived here that I left. Everything else I had ripped out, but you can see those two were much larger. So all the others were really small when I found them because they're not one that's grown a lot anymore. You can't find it as easily. So they're now coming up into size and eventually they'll all be the same size. Behind those is where we're talking about today. And you can see I pulled out some Russian sage that I had planted in the last couple years just because I picked a perennial that I knew would live, but it never really thrived here. I just didn't like the look of it. It was a little bit too wiry and kind of too all over the place for back here. I picked one of the newer varieties of Russian sage and I just never really enjoyed the form of it against my more formal kind of front yard or front landscape. So back in here, there's a space for 5 plants. So I put them right, you can kind of see where the box would make a zigzag pattern. And so I want a plant when each zigzag comes out towards the front and it creates more of kind of an open section back there. Now in the spring, there's lots of allium bulbs, foxtail lilies that bloom here, but I still want blooms later in the season. And while I feel like I'm going much more into my perennial era on many other parts of the yard, up here I do still want some formality and I want something to look a little bit more classic. So obviously hydrangeas are always the thing I go to. Years past I had tried little limes, I believe, and maybe bobo. And I really do think they were getting burned mostly by the cement, so you might be saying, it's not gonna happen again. The one big difference is they were on the south side. It can get really dry. I do have drip line here now, so I'm planning on having these on a drip line, which I think will really help. And so I feel really good about that. I'm gonna try it, new to me. I'm gonna try the Firelight Tidbits. So fall is a great time to be looking for plants that maybe your nursery is gonna have some sales if they don't wanna overwinter everything. Maybe you can just find some end of season plants. And I think a lot of us get scared to plant in the fall. I happen to think it's a great time to plant most things. There's of course some exceptions on things that would maybe rather go in the spring. What I think about is I'm in zone 5B in southeast Iowa. So we are going to stay, our soil will not freeze at the earliest most likely until December. Even then it could be late December until it really freezes hard into the soil. That means planting these kind of early in the fall is going to still have plenty of time where those roots can get acclimated, even start growing. And what we want to do is focus on root growth when we're planting these. We don't want to focus on top growth. That's going to be going dormant as the season changes. That's no question. But as long as those roots are happy, they're going to kind of settle in and then go right into their winter slumber perfectly. So when preparing the site, You can see I have really easy soil to work with here. Now, of course, if you wanted to amend the soil, that's always a good idea. If you feel like your soil is clay or heavy or doesn't drain well, that all really does make a difference with what you're planting. You know, hydrangea like nice, rich, well-draining soil. So that means they don't want to sit in water, but they obviously want to have good nutrients in their soil. So if you want to, you can amend at least 50% by some good organic compost. You know I love the Land and Sea compost from Espoma. You could do a mushroom compost too, which I always really like. You know, amending your soil helps build that soil over time into a healthier soil. So if you can always top dress with some compost too, if you feel like your soil's lacking, always a good idea. Honestly, this area, I had put compost on in the last year or two, so before I put some mulch on, so I feel like it has that nutrients in it and it does have that great quality. And you can see my soil here is really easy to work with. Now, in some areas, I could hit a bulb. If I do, I will just replant it because we're pretty much in the season where we can be planting bulbs. And the one thing I'm very lucky with where I live is I don't really have rocky soil. I don't really have clayish soil. I just kind of have some nice black soil. That doesn't always mean it's the most nutrient. That's why amending can be a great idea. So once I have the hole here ready, my big thing is thinking, I want to make sure those roots have exactly what they need. So for me, that's always going to be using biotone. You know, I love Espoma's biotone because it really helps not only build soil health, but it helps those roots get acclimated and want to really dig in to where they're being planted. And especially when we're going into a time of year like we are now, where we're going to have the top growth go dormant, those roots are going to stay active for a while. So giving them something that's going to be beneficial for the roots is essential. I always mix it into the soil a little bit. And you can see here already, it is dry here. We have not had good rain in a while. We did have some rain a little over a week ago, but it's been so dry overall that you can hardly even tell. That tells me right away that I am going to have to watch this for watering here on the south side. That's going to be essential. So that's why I have this drip line here, and hopefully I'll show you here how I can hook little emitters up to it specifically for all these hydrangea. So I'm gonna pop this out of its container, and you can see this one is not really tight as far as the roots go. When they're really tight and starting to encircle themselves, I take a lot more time to really go in and kind of scarify them. This one I'm just going to a little bit around the bottom. I'm really not that worried. This is mostly little capillary roots. They're not near that tight. So what I'm gonna do first is set it in the hole. I wanna make sure it's not too deep. And I know that usually for people, they're like, what do you mean? If you plant a plant too deep, even a hydrangea, it is not going to get the right level of oxygen it needs. It's going to actually suffocate the plant if it's too deep. So plant it no deeper than it currently is growing in that pot. And that's essential. What I always do is actually plant it a little higher, because whenever you displace soil like this, over time, it is going to settle a little bit and go a little deeper. So I will always plant it a little higher than you would think for that reason. Now, there's always a couple ideas here. You could fill the hole with water before you backfill with soil if you want to. And that's fine. That's a good way to test if it drains well or not. If it sits with water for too long, it isn't going to drain well. I know this drains well. I'm not worried about that. I also just am going to come in and water it when I'm all done. I'm not too worried about any of that. I have them all planted, but I want to show you a little bit about drip line and hooking up something so it has an emitter directly to it. A few years ago, I invested in drip line, and that was put in because I don't have water sources all throughout my yard. And you know, when you're investing in plants, you want to think about it to make sure they're being taken care of properly, and it was just getting to be too much for me to be able to always do that. And so I have drip line that was put in the ground to certain areas, obviously. Around the house, it didn't have to be put into the ground because it just comes directly from the house. But right here is the drip line tubing. And this is usually, so this has built-in emitters that just emit about every foot or something for kind of a slow drip. But you can put other emitters on them or put them directly to a plant if you need to, which is what I'm gonna do here. So I always have for that small, like 1/4-inch tubing. So this is like the small tubing that I use if I want to go directly to a plant off of a main line. And so this usually I'll just kind of eyeball or measure how much I need, and I'll just cut a piece off, and you can always recut it a little bit later or kind of do it a little bit more definitively. But this is going to be a small amount, which is really nice. And what I can do is put little emitters in it. So like these are fittings that will allow it to poke into that main line. So I put one piece in this, so it will go tight around it so there's no drips outside of it and that it's a good connection. This is a puncher tool. If you see, it pushes out a little puncher. And so when I'm able to take it and put a punch right into this main line, I now have a hole. I at first was trying to do this with like a nail or other pieces of a tool, and that just is not a good idea because you either make not a good hole. You want it to be a nice sharp hole, and you're gonna just stick this right into that main line. And now at the end of this, I can put any type of drip emitter I want onto, from 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 5 gallon. It just depends how long you run your emitter or your drip line for. If you run it for an hour and you put on a 2 gallon an hour emitter, in that hour you're gonna get about 2 gallons of water per plant. So it just kind of depends, but I'm gonna put this emitter now on the end, and now this can go directly to this plant, and I can do that for all 5 of these hydrangea I planted. And then I usually use a landscape stapler pin and put it so it will stay with that plant, you know, a little bit better. I don't want it to go off into something else. So I'll usually use a little staple here, sometimes 2 to make sure it stays down, because then when I put mulch over it, it hides them. So either this fall or next spring, I'll probably put mulch over these areas. But now I can put these emitters to each one so I know they're properly getting water. Now, of course, you still need to check them. Don't just assume always it's getting water. All throughout the season, every week, I will be checking to make sure they're properly watered. Depending on how much you run your emitters or not, you may want to supplement them with water, do some of your own watering. You don't want anything to be overwatered. I know this drains well, so I'm not worried about that. It does not ever sit in water. If you have that issue, drip line can be hard because you really have to watch it and do small amounts of water if needed, if it doesn't drain well. I'm all done with the emitters, but I just turned them on and I want you to see, hopefully, you can kind of hear them going on. But if you go in close, you see that little drips of water now coming out, and now each one is gonna have that. So of course you can adjust this to your personal preferences, to whatever works best for you, but it's kind of a great insurance policy. The noise from them is just when the air works out of the lines. That noise does not stay, I promise. But of course I will water them first here really well on my own. I won't just trust those emitters in the beginning. So what we first started with here is this big, beautiful, by the way, elephant ear. Now it's on the side of my house I don't show as much. It's the side that has the air conditioner units. It's the side that, you know, internet cables run into my house. So it's all of those things that you kind of usually try to hide. But it took up a nice big area. Recently with some wind, you can see it got a little bit of kind of ratty on it. A little bit of like the edges got a little bit gnarled and things don't look as good. So my grandma always grew elephant ear. Every year she had the whole west side of her house. It's actually the west side of my house too, didn't think about that. Filled with elephant ear, and we still have a couple from her. She passed away in 2014, but I think plants are such a great way to pass on memories of someone. So we do still have some that we plant every year. And what we do is pretty much what she did. You can take an elephant ear in and you can treat it like a house plant if you want to. As you can see, this variety is a little bit large. A friend gave me this one, actually a follower from a local area, gave me this one because she said hers gets so big and it sends off pups. This was one of the pups. And it actually got so big, it started blooming even. Do you see those blooms? Usually colocasia, alocasia don't necessarily bloom a lot, except in their native habitat, but this one gets so big that it has. And it will keep sending up leaves kind of out of its center. You see the center? But I want to take it in and I am not going to pot it up for indoor use like in my house because it just gets too big for my house. Now if you had a big area, this would be really fun. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do to take it in. So the first thing I'm going to do to get this ready for winter is take off most of its leaves, if not all of them. So I'm going to go in with a knife to start. Now these are great compost, don't get rid of these. But I'm going to go in and just chop them all back. I mean, look how big. This is my hand. This is a 12-inch knife. Look how big this thing is. I mean, it is just massive how big it has gotten. Now, all these usually, when they send up a leaf, they come out with a new leaf usually right beside it. So if you want to keep one for indoor use, you don't want to cut it back so far that you're cutting back all of the leaves that haven't yet pushed out. Since it's going into storage for me, I'm not as worried about that. But it's going to be much easier to manage. Look at the size. I'm a little over 6 foot. It's taller than me if it stands beside me. It's kind of amazing sometimes what plants can do in one season of growth. and it has to be taken in. Isn't that amazing that it can still grow that much? Now it's gonna start exposing the things I was hiding from it, my pipes from my house. So here you can see is a leaf that if you wanted to dig it up and take it in, this is what I would keep on there. And we'll see if I can, I'll keep it on. But usually what I do is let them go dormant over the winter. Because for me, it just kind of works well to do that. Now all these blooms I'm gonna also cut off just because I think, you know, blooms in general for a plant are usually kind of a release or almost like a stress point. They have to put a lot of energy into them. So if you can cut off the blooms, to me, that's gonna be actually one of your best kind of just ways to help it go into its dormant period. So at the moment, I'll keep on this center leaf because this would be a great time now if I wanted to dig it up and try to repot it if you wanted to keep it, or if it was a smaller variety. This would be a great point to keep onto it. So what I'm gonna do is come in with my shovel and just dig it. Now I'm not too worried, like I said, about keeping it intact because I want it to kind of go dormant anyway. So I'm gonna lift it around, and this is kind of similar what you can do to a tropical banana. If you have an ornamental banana plant that you like, you know, things like that. It's kind of the same process. And every year you have to remember this main plant is gonna get bigger and bigger. What I also want to show you, if you look close, good native ladybugs. They're probably wanting to hibernate on it, so it's a good time to put them on other plants to make sure they have a safe winter. Now that I have it pulled out, we can talk about winter storage. Now, this is actually a good pivot for me. Kip is here, and we're gonna play a little bit. When we had these always growing up, or when Grandma always did them, usually they would develop, and it could be the variety too, developed a big bulb on them, kind of like the bulbs you buy of certain elephant ear in garden centers. But ours had these long, big bulbs, and we would just dig up the bulb, put it into a box like we would canna, cow lily, glads, anything like that, and let it go dormant and then plant it next spring. This one has not developed a big bulb, and maybe this variety won't. So I feel more comfortable about potting it up. So I have a big plastic container, like a nursery pot, and I'm just gonna put in all-purpose pine soil. I use this foam all-purpose pine soil pretty much for everything. Every so often I will use more direct soils, like if it's a citrus tree, or things like that, or certain succulents or violets. I'll do different orchids, different soils. But for any of the stuff I bring in over the winter, I'm pretty much always using all-purpose potting soil. And what I do is I just pot it up. Now, if it's a really big pot like this, you could put like a third of it to half of it with just a regular hardwood mulch, just to, you know, be a little bit more economical. This isn't too big a container, so I'm probably not gonna do that with this. Instead, I'm just going to fill it about halfway. And this whole point is not that it like grows like huge over the winter. As you can see already, this is gonna take a little bit more room in my plant room than I would like. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna set it in here and see kind of where we're at. That's pretty good. I like to be a couple inches below the container line, just for when I water it, it doesn't overflow. But really, that's gonna be just about right. Now, like I said, if I see beautiful little beneficial ladybugs, I'm gonna make sure to pick them off because I want them to be outside where they need to be for the winter, okay? For the final shock and awe, we're just gonna go ahead and do it. We're gonna cut this thing all the way back. And then I'll let it sit outside here for a little bit, but eventually it will go into my plant room and it will just live and eventually be pushing out more growth. As you can see, they get really big. I do think it will send off pups eventually, and I can have smaller ones kind of to start. But this is now ready for winter to save it. You know, when we love plants, when we love to experience beautiful things outdoors, maybe tropicals that we don't get to do, we find ways to keep them over the winter so we can enjoy them for years to come. And I think there's something special in the process of saving plants, getting them out, whether you're holding on to memories from family, whether you're just enjoying something that usually wouldn't grow in your area and kind of sparks conversation with others that come over. It's special. Okay, friends, we got a lot done today. And even though the season is changing, there's still a lot of things we can do outside. We can still plant plants like those hydrangeas. The big thing with them is, even with the drip, my drip will have to be turned off long before I stop watering them. I will probably water them depending on the weather. If it stays warm, and we don't have rain, I will water them probably well through November. And if we have warm-ups in the middle of winter, say abnormally warm winters like we do sometimes, I will give them bits of water because they're on the south side, they're gonna dry out quickly, and those roots could still be active and you don't want them to dry out even over the winter. So things like that is what you wanna pay more attention to when you plant something in the fall. Getting plants ready for winter, if you have some things out, maybe they're in a container and you just pick them up and take them in, or if you're like me and you plant some things in the ground, you have to bring them in and plant them and kind of store them in different ways. So that's what this is all about. The garden, still beautiful and lush. It will be changing very rapidly in the next few weeks, as we soon will be having our first freezes and frosts, and things will really go into dormancy, but until then, we can enjoy it just a little bit longer.